Once upon a time, there was a tiny kingdom, and there lived a kind gentleman and his daughter Cinderella, whose mother had passed away when she was younger. He felt that she needed a mother, so he married again to a woman with 2 daughters around Cinderella's age. It was only after her father's passing that she learned the true nature of her stepmother, cruel and jealous. Eventually, Cinderella was forced to be a servant to the stepmother and stepsisters. And despite it all, she remained cheerful and graceful, holding on to a dream of a better life someday. That brings us to Lesson 1, Optimism. Cinderella lost everything, and yet she still dreamed of a better life. Also Lesson 2, Perseverance. Cinderella had stick-to-itiveness and went through many hardships, and yet woke up morning after morning with a dream that someday things would get better. Cinderella was kind to all the animals around her, often rescuing mice from mousetraps and adopting them as her own, giving them clothes to dress in. Cinderella not only takes care of her stepmother and her stepsisters, but she also cares for all the animals on the estate, down to the little mice she has taken under her care. Cinderella's kindness flowed out of her good nature, but she did not know someday soon these small animals would be able to repay her kindness in a way she never would have dreamed. Lesson 3. Be kind. Others will often return kindness to you later when you show them kindness now. On the other side of the kingdom, in the palace, the king is tired of being so distant from his son, the prince. He wants to have children again in the palace and wants to have grandchildren. The Grand Duke and himself then hatch a plan where they will host a grand ball for his son and all the eligible maidens of the kingdom, hoping that the prince will fall in love with one of them. While dreamily singing while washing the floor, oh, wait, this is Lesson 4, Hard Work. Cinderella knew how to work hard and to do it with a song and a smile. And while she was washing the floor, Cinderella is interrupted by a messenger from the king proclaiming that every eligible maiden is to attend a ball tonight with the prince. Cinderella also becomes excited because she realizes that she should be included in this royal proclamation. But with a sinister grin on her face, her stepmother agrees, if she can finish her chores, and if she can find something suitable to wear. Notice how Cinderella is able to speak up for herself and voice her opinion? That brings us to Lesson 5, Self-Worth. Cinderella knew she was more than a scullery maid. She held herself upright and treated herself with self-respect, knowing she was worth more than what her stepmother and stepsisters were treating her. Back in her room, she explains to her small friends her plan to trim up her mother's old dress and make it look more modern. But in the middle of her dress planning, her stepsisters and mother call on her to do a higher than usual amount of chores. Cinderella starts to have little hope of finishing in time to work on her own ball preparations. Finally, finding a way to repay Cinderella's kindness to them, her small animal friends work on the dress alterations themselves, finding dress materials wherever they can scrounge them, unfortunately even finding some materials from her stepsisters' rooms. Later that day, it's time to head to the ball, and Cinderella despairingly admits to her stepmother she is not ready to go to the ball. She reflects on another disappointment, saying, "Oh well, what's a royal ball? After all, I suppose it would be frightfully dull and boring, and fully wonderful." Lesson 6. Let it go. After being dealt with blow after blow, Cinderella didn't let it get to her, and she didn't dwell on how rough she had it. She moved on. While absorbing her disappointment, she was still able to move on. Then, to her utter surprise, her small friends show her their hard work, which allows her to go to the ball after all. Cinderella heads downstairs to join her stepsisters to go to the ball, but sharp as ever, her stepmother realizes that Cinderella's dress is made from things from the stepsisters' rooms and allows the stepsisters to destroy the dress. Lesson 7, Unattractive Traits. We can also learn a lot from Cinderella's stepfamily, and even from the cat Lucifer. Their traits are things we wish to avoid: callousness, cruelty, envy, greed, jealousy, laziness, selfishness, vanity. In utter despair, Cinderella rushes to the garden to cry on a bench. She's not sure anymore whether life will ever get better for her. But suddenly she hears a voice who tries to cheer her up. A woman appears and claims to be Cinderella's fairy godmother. Lesson 8. the power of mentors. Cinderella reached rock bottom in the garden, and all of her dreams seemed to come crashing down. Then appears her fairy godmother, not only to grant her a miracle, but also to restore her soul and speak into her life. When was the last time you found someone older and wiser than you and asked them to speak into your life? With a few magic words and a wave of her magic wand, the godmother creates a splendid coach out of a pumpkin. Horses from the mice, a coachman and footman from the horse and dog, and last but not least, the beauty of a dress. Something simple and daring. Something to impress the prince with Cinderella's natural beauty. Lesson 9. Transformation. Even in our darkest hour, a radical transformation is possible. Cinderella heads to the ball with the knowledge that her magical dream will only last until midnight when the spell will break. Lesson 10. Realism. Before she left, the fairy godmother said, "Like all dreams, I'm afraid this won't last forever. Even when we achieve happiness in our lives, we must realize that it won't be permanent, and someday we will face hardship and trials again." At the ball, the prince is bored with all the maidens who greet him until he looks up and sees the girl of his dreams, and his heart tells him that here is the girl that is destined to become his bride. Cinderella and the prince dance the night away under the protection of the Grand Duke's care against snooping and prying eyes. In the garden, Cinderella and the prince realize that they have met the love of their life. Lesson 11. Authenticity. Ultimately, it wasn't Cinderella's pretty dress and carriage that won the prince's heart. It was her true and genuine nature that drew him. Being yourself is attractive. If only they could stay with each other, the dream would only continue. But, alas, the clock strikes midnight, and Cinderella rushes out of the palace, leaving the prince without him ever knowing her name, leaving only a glass slipper behind. While rushing away in the carriage, the last stroke of midnight strikes and turns everything back into a pumpkin and some mice. At the palace, the Grand Duke explains to the king that the girl of the prince's dreams has escaped, but there is one hope of finding her: the glass slipper. Lesson 12. Hope. Hope is key to living a successful life. The prince had hope in finding the girl of his dreams. Cinderella had hope in finding a brighter future for her life. Cinderella's stepmother wakes her daughters with the news that another royal proclamation has been made. The prince is hunting for the girl he danced with last night and is madly in love with her. The Grand Duke is traveling through the kingdom, and by the king's command, whoever's foot fits in the glass slipper will become the king's bride. As Cinderella hears the news and hears that the prince is searching for her, she dreamily heads up to her room, and her stepmother realizes that it was Cinderella who was the girl at the ball. She doesn't know how it happened, but she knows she can at least lock up Cinderella to stop her from being discovered by the Grand Duke and give her own daughters a chance to try the slipper on. Cinderella cries bitterly at the injustice of what is being done. Lesson 13. Showing emotion. Cinderella wasn't afraid to cry and make herself vulnerable. It's a trait of strength, not weakness. While the stepsisters are trying on the glass slipper, Jacques and Gus sneak away with the key, and despite being set with the seemingly impossible task of bringing the key all the way up the stairs, the mice succeed in bringing the key to Cinderella to help her escape. Just when the Grand Duke is about to leave, Cinderella comes streaming down the stairs to try on the glass slipper. Lesson 14. Courage. When Cinderella escaped from her room, her stepmother and sisters were outraged and mortified. It took great courage to seize the opportunity of the Grand Duke being there and to come and say, "Your Grace, please wait. May I try it on?" But in her jealousy, the stepmother wouldn't let it happen. She trips the Duke's footman and makes the glass slipper shatter into a million pieces. But when all hope seems to have been lost, Cinderella takes out the other slipper and proves her identity to the Grand Duke. Lesson 15. Resistance. The final act of defiance of Cinderella against her cruel captors was when she revealed how she had the other slipper, and that allowed her to escape her unfair life. When faced with injustice, don't be afraid to resist and face it straight on. Cinderella is whisked off to the palace and soon made bride of the prince. And so Cinderella has a happy ending after all, showing that if only you keep on believing, the dream that you wish will come true.